Our core mission is to promote the technological welfare of our nation by marshalling the collective knowledge and insights of our country's most eminent engineering professionals. In doing so, we complement the statutory functions of bodies like the Engineering Council of South Africa. As part of our global footprint through the International Council of Academies of Engineering and Technological Sciences, we aim to be a trusted, sought-after source of independent, evidence-based advice to help improve the quality of life for all South Africans. As engineers, our foundational mission is to design, build, and maintain infrastructure that elevates human life and secures public well-being. Yet, looking at our transport network today, we face a stark and devastating reality. We are confronting a public safety crisis that claims roughly between 11,000 and 12,000 lives on our roads every single year. South Africa has a massive total road network spanning approximately 750,000 kilometers. This makes it the longest and largest network of any country in Africa, ranking as the 10th longest road network in the world. The oversight and maintenance of this vast grid are shared across multiple levels. As you know, we are talking about national roads, provincial roads, municipal roads, and then, of course, the unproclaimed access roads. If I'm just looking at the national roads, the South African National Roads Agency, or SANRAL as we know it, directly managed about 28,000 kilometers of the primary national highway network. While this represents roughly 4% of the country's total roads, it carries over 1/3 of all vehicle traffic and up to 70% of long-distance road freight. So engineering solutions, no matter how advanced, resilient, or smart, cannot protect these lives in isolation. The structural integrity of our highways must rely on a matching integrity in human behavior, corporate fleet accountability, and systematic law enforcement. Today, our academies bring together engineering precision, empirical scientific evidence, and policy design to comfort these numbers head on. Thank you for your presence, your expertise, and your shared commitment to engineering a safer, more predictable future on our roads. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Felix. In support of what Felix has just mentioned, I'll share something that I think is quite important for us to understand as a collective. In 2022, South Africa lost 12,400 people in road crashes, which kind of alludes to the 11 to 12,000 that Felix was mentioning. That's 21 deaths per 100,000 people in the country. Just to put it in context, it is double the global average of deaths per 100,000 people. In 2023, it was again 12,000 people. Of that 12,000 people, 5,500 were pedestrians. They call us a low-medium income country, LMIC. That's how it's defined in global terms. And I think we can appreciate why that is called a low to medium income country. We have 60% of the world's vehicles, but 90% of the world's deaths on roads. So that should give us a sense of why this topic is so important. I'd like now to hand over to Dr. Malusi Mtwala, who's going to give some opening remarks on behalf of SAFA. Dr.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. On behalf of the Academy of Science of South Africa, firstly, I would like to register our appreciation to the South African Academy of Engineering as well as GIP for hosting us today for this event. On behalf of our President, Professor Thokozani Majozi, as well as our Executive Officer, Professor Hinda Sudial, we really are grateful for this partnership. Now, I would just like to share what the Academy is and also to put into context why we actually are involved in prioritizing such an activity. ASAF, the Academy of Science of South Africa, is the official science academy for South Africa, which is established through an act of parliament. And generally, its mission is to use science for the benefit of society. The ASAF mandate encompasses, amongst other issues, the execution of evidence-informed science advice for policies, or predominantly in support of government. But also, our mandate includes the promotion of public interest and raising awareness in science as well as science education. Today's session, which focuses on driving behavior and road safety in South Africa, resonates with the Academy's commitment to evidence-based dialogue for the benefit of society. According to some of the official figures by the Department of Transport in South Africa, we lost during peak times 1,427 lives on the road during the 2025 festive period. A further 291 lives were lost during the 2026 Easter period. These are just during peak seasons, but some of the recent speakers have shared the annual figures. So this is something that really is at the forefront of affecting society. Those are huge numbers if we expect them. And whilst the loss of life is the ultimate and undesired health outcome, the subsequent social and economic impact of such fatalities can never be fully quantified. The destabilization of family life, long-term and permanent health effects, which come at a high financial as well as mental burden, are some of the societal issues that we can overcome or we can reduce by actually reducing the number of fatalities on our roads. As a result of such an important societal issue, ASAF has prioritized the focus area of future of society to deal with issues that directly affect society at large. We hope that today's dialogue, in conjunction with other initiatives that are unpacked by other platforms elsewhere, will positively contribute to reducing such a national challenge. We are grateful to our partners for prioritizing this issue in our partnership, specifically the South African Academy of Engineering, as well as the support by our host, GIP, today. And we are very thankful to our expert speakers who've accepted to share their insights in today's session. ASAF is hopeful that by utilizing scientific evidence as well as societal experience, and through partnerships such as this one, we can overcome this significant national challenge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Tola. I think you raised a very important point. The phenomenon of evidence-based research has fast become disconnected from society. It becomes apparent that the knowledge that we have within the country on various concepts seems to become unheard. Many academics go silent. Many of us that know what the solutions are and are able to frame problems go quiet. And that should be and that is exactly why we are having this event. We want to connect evidence-based research, like you've mentioned, and to show how it affects and what the solutions could be on people. Because that is exactly why we are here. We all have a role to play to improve the lives, the quality of lives of people around us. That's why we have researchers that look to progress technology. That is why we have engineers to implement such things. And that's why we have people like yourselves, the media, to communicate these various important concepts to society at large. And that is what we expect from today. If we can get the message out there that road safety is preventable, it is not at anyone's cost to prevent safe behaviors on road. We can divert so much capacity to other initiatives that are in dire need of help. The causes of road safety or the road safety related issues, especially when it comes to deaths, we're not even talking about the road accident fund and the implications of its own unsustainability because of the number of people that are hurt on roads. In South Africa specifically, if you go back in and look at the configuration of why people spend so much of time on roads, it's got a historical issue of spatial inequality. That is why people spend so much of time on roads. We've also got an affordability issue. That is why people maybe spend a lot of time in unsafe vehicles, for example. So the issue is not straightforward. It is not an engineer that will solve it. It may not be a researcher that will solve it, but it is going to be solved by a collective. It's an interdisciplinary subject that requires multiple stakeholders to unravel it, and we rely on our media partners to communicate. If you would do so effectively, it would be really appreciated. Thank you. So now moving on, we have a very esteemed group of, I would say, friends and colleagues, experts who have studied this phenomenon and have multiple constructs to road safety that they will share with us. I'd like to just start with a bit of an introduction. If I had to read their bios, we will be done by lunch. So I think I will just summarize, if you would allow me, because I think the topic is very important, and your humility might allow me to not subvert your importance in this gathering. Okay, so please bear with me. Ms. Busisiwe Marole, transport researcher and candidate civil engineer on Smart Mobility Cluster, Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, commonly known as the CSIR. Ms. Busisiwe Marole is a transport researcher and a candidate civil engineer based in Pretoria in South Africa, with experience in transportation planning, road safety research, and smart mobility systems. Busisiwe, can I leave it there? Thank you. Ms. Matabo Masagaila, Senior Manager Planning, Roads Agency Limpopo, South Africa. Ms. Masagaila, I think it's very important that you have joined us online, and thank you for doing so. I know it's a difficult time for you to have been able to travel, and I really appreciate your ability to join us online. I also think coming from the Roads Agency of Limpopo, that is one of the corridors that is in part where many lives are lost during these periods of time that we know well about. Okay, so Ms. Masagaila is a civil engineer with over 10 years of experience in transport infrastructure planning, road asset management, infrastructure strategy, and public sector infrastructure delivery within South Africa. Thank you for joining. Ms. Sakari Panyane Sekane, Chief Executive Officer, the South African Institution of Civil Engineering. Ms. Sakari Panyane Sekane is a professional civil engineer and a transformational leader with more than 20 years of experience in the infrastructure and transportation sector. She currently serves as Chief Executive Officer of the South African Institution of Civil Engineering, where she leads initiatives focused on innovation, infrastructure development, transformation, and what I noticed importantly is social impact within the engineering profession. Last but not least, Dr. Lee Randall, founder of the Road Ethics Project, South Africa. Dr. Lee Randall is an occupational therapist and road ethicist with more than 3 decades of experience working with road crash survivors. This is a very interesting profession, Dr. Randall. It's actually the first I've heard of this. She's graduated from the University of Witwatersrand and obtained a master's degree in the United States before completing a PhD through the Steve Biko Center for Bioethics, focusing on road safety and the minibus taxi industry. So, colleagues, please allow me to welcome our esteemed panel and Ms. Masagala online so that we can take the discussion forward. The plan for the day, let me just share with you, is that each of our panelists will have a 15-minute slot to present a storyline on their experiences and their contributions from a road safety perspective. They share their knowledge, and we'll start to then frame what this topic is about. Thereafter, we will have approximately an hour discussion where we will discuss more freely the concepts that have come up during their presentation. I will have the luxury of asking questions. At least my job is the easy one. They will have the difficulty of answering. So let's see how that goes. After that, we will have a question and comments, and we would like the media to be involved in those questions. You may have a different perspective on road safety, having covered these kind of concepts in the past. And you may have your own narratives, which will help support us in getting this out in terms of the importance and the messaging. So you please, during the course of the presentation, think about the questions you'd like to ask the panel, if you don't mind. Okay? And then we will have the closing remarks, and then we would have a photograph, which I see is going to happen, and then we will close at the end of the session. So there is a plan. I hope to stick to the time, and I might be the one guilty of already delaying everything. But the importance of the event nonetheless matters. And if we do run a little bit over, so be it. We are talking about people. So let me start with Sakari. Sakari, if you don't mind, sharing some of your contributions around driving behavior. We have not deconstructed road safety yet. So maybe before I start, a lot of it is behavior. And we will hear some of the statistics come through just now on how much of it is related to behavior of people. And my guess, last time I read, was about 80% of the fatalities on our road is related to human behavior. Second is infrastructure. Okay, so let's take it from there. So Sakari, if you don't mind sharing with us your thoughts and your contributions around driving behavior and road safety, from an engineering perspective. I hand to you.
Sorry, Dr. Can you just please our microphone?
Thank you very much, Program Director. Thank you to the Academy of Science South Africa, as well as the South African Academy of Engineering to give to the media. And I'm coming from the South African Institution of Civil Engineering, but in my previous life, I also did a lot of research work around vulnerable users, road users, with the University of Cape Town. So my presentation will be looking and defining more on who are these people who are involved in crashes in South Africa, what is the face of the fatalities that we talk about, and then from an engineering perspective, how we can assist to slow this down and decrease fatalities. So we've heard a lot of stats being mentioned. I think the really apt one is the fact that 23% of people in South Africa walk all the way to schools, to the economic opportunities on a daily basis. 49% use public transport, but obviously walking will then form a part of their trip making, in that it will be the last mile that they will utilize to walk. And this means that 72% of South Africans incorporate walking in some way or other due to, as the program director said, either a cost issue because they cannot afford any other means of transport. And if you look at the African region as a whole, when you look at the absolute numbers of fatalities, the main people within Africa who are succumbing to fatalities from a road safety perspective are coming from the low income and lower middle income groups. So when we also look at stats that the RTMC released in 2025, 75% of these fatalities are males, 80% of whom are African. And perhaps it's been said, and maybe Dr. Lee would go into further detail on this, that men have riskier behavior than women and women are more cautious. And already in South Africa, we have 65% of children who live without their biological fathers, 69% who are African. So if we look at the impact of fatalities and the people who are mostly affected, we're looking at a national development crisis with cascading social, economic, and demographic consequences. When it has also been said that NMT fatalities, NMT being pedestrian and cyclists, remain at 46%, more pedestrian than cyclists, and if you track it over the 2-year period from 2024 to 2025, and the types of crashes that are currently happening within the country relate to pedestrians and to hit and runs. Over 50% of them, the crash types relates to pedestrians. And the people who are then within this fatality category who succumb are pedestrians. And as I said before, if 80% of those people are male, and most of them come from the lower income and low income categories. So it has been said that human factors are the main contributor to the crashes that we see, and the road environment is sitting at about 6%. From an engineering perspective, we can be like, oh, thank God, we're not really involved, but we are. If you look at the causes of the human factors, it's mainly jaywalking, pedestrians, and hit and runs. And we also need to then look at what are we doing from an engineering perspective, which is resulting in pedestrians to jaywalk in the first place, and in resulting in people to speed in the first place for these fatalities to take place. So the safe systems approach has been postulated since 2017 or so, and it's been incorporated into our national planning and programs, which says that the safety and preservation of human life is the highest consideration. Deaths and injuries are not an inevitable outcome. And the system must be designed to absorb human error, because we do err, and there must be multiple safety layers within the system, from a road perspective, from a vehicle perspective, from a speed perspective, from a behavior perspective. And if one fails, then the other ones must still be there to protect it. Work that was done at UCT is to take the safe systems approach and really reimagine it from an infrastructure perspective. So at the heart of it are the users. We want to have safe users who are educated around their road environment, they're compliant as well. And we know that, these physically vulnerable users who are walking to schools, to their places of work on a daily basis, make errors. And then we have to also look at the environment in which people are walking, the multimodal transport and land use planning aspects. We look at the road and the roadside. We look at the vehicles and the speeds. And then we also look at the post-crash and medical care and its ability to be able to get to the crash scenes in time. So when we look at road users, 75% of the South African population currently consists of people, males younger than 18, women from all, like younger than 18 and older than 18, because it has been proven that males and women and females have got different experiences when they travel within the transport environment. We've got people with hearing disabilities who have issues with mobility, who are using wheelchairs, with issues with sight, and the elderly as well. And it's only 25% of users within the South African population who we believe are being accommodated in traditional road design. And we need to start asking ourselves these critical questions: that who are we designing for? When we talk about universal access, are we just paying lip service to it, or are we actually being intentional in the way that we design and plan our cities? So we've had a lot of guidelines and specifications from a National Department of Transport perspective, from Sunwell's perspective, but are these cascading down to the engineers at tertiary level who are coming into the system, and to other built environment professionals as well, to be able to design for these and accommodate these users. Another example, when we design for traffic signals, it's mainly designed for an average adult who can walk at 1.2 meters per second. But studies have shown that most people do not walk at 1.2 meters per second. I mean, the elderly do not. They are at about 1. Most people within Cape Town, which was the study area, 50% of them are also walking at 1 meter per second. Children, children are not accommodated, and just normal day-to-day adults. So what are we doing around applications around schools, around hospitals, around our clinics, where most of these vulnerable road users are found? And when we look at the safe systems approach from a land use and transport planning perspective, we really believe that we have to have a paradigm shift where the main focus has always been conventional traffic flow. We need to get the mobility in order. We need to ensure that there is no, that the traffic can flow freely, and we need to minimize the travel time as well. And the social aspects are mainly neglected, the people focused, the compact urban forms. We build cities which are very much car orientated, and somebody once said, build it and they will come. So if you're going to have that kind of context, the cars will come, instead of having people oriented cities and people oriented streets and shorter distances for people to travel on. Then another aspect of the land use transport planning is transport justice. When we look at mobility and accessibility and aspects of time, and also the gender aspect, we come to a conclusion that a road or transport system is only just and safe when it works for the person with the worst combination of all 4 dimensions simultaneously. The best example being a child commuting. Can that child get to school by themselves without any adult intervention and come back home safely? And if we had to be honest with ourselves, it's very few areas within the country which we can say that. Then another area of research that GCT is undertaking is around road safety deserts, and where you look at supply in terms of infrastructure supply and creating, good infrastructure, networks are in the city, and then you overlay the hazardous locations, so people and the fatalities are taking place. And overall, it has come once more that it's the areas which were mainly planned or excluded in apartheid planning systems that have the greatest fatalities and the greatest road safety deserts. So we are just over-creating the same problem, not investing enough in places that we should be investing in from an infrastructure perspective. And when we look at speed, a lot of studies have been done around how we can, especially for class 1 to 2, class 4 and 5 roads, how we can reduce speed because it's a fact that at 30 kilometers per hour, 1 in 10 pedestrians will die if they're hit by a car. But at 60 kilometers per hour, 9 out of 10 pedestrians will die if they are hit by a car. And so the Department of Transport issued the study where guidelines were put together for how we can reduce speeds within these class 4 to 5 roads. And I can assure you that it is not being utilized. And even though the research backs it, the research backs the impact of these interventions in ensuring that we bring down speeds. Not to say that that there'll be a reduction in collision, but definitely in speed and in awareness of the pedestrians and the users within our environment. And various cost-benefit estimations have been done around these interventions, which I won't go into. And then when we look at the road and the roadside, it's very fundamental that we have to continue and have to start in certain circumstances doing regular audits in built-up areas for junctions, looking at our street lighting, looking at the obstructions, looking at the road alignment, the road marking types and conditions, the road sign conditions, the road surface type and the quality and the condition thereof. And we need to ensure that our road signs are visible, like during the day and during the night. And these audits need to be compulsory. I know a lot of the provincial departments have started doing this, but it needs to go down to the metros as well as the local municipalities. We also have to review our standards regarding, especially class 4 and 5 roads, in terms of the speeds and the speeds that we design for, and ensure that we use integrated standards when we deal with various aspects of road and people engineering. The South African Institution of Civil Engineering also puts together an infrastructure report card, which looks at the condition of infrastructure. And when you look at the provincial condition, it has been quite obvious that the maintenance grants are skewed towards those authorities with less kilometer road network, and especially less to local and rural municipalities as well. And our municipal roads are not doing well. We have to really look at dedicated funding for roads at the municipal level and to ensure that we upkeep what we have and not like let it deteriorate beyond what it is currently. And when you look at intersections, there's so many conflicting points on an intersection. They've been counted to be about 24 or so. And these are the type of things that we need to, as engineers, be quite cognizant of when we do our designs and our road space allocation, not to just look for and calculating for cars, but to like incorporate all road users equitably. The final aspect is around the golden hour. When we did the Western Cape Road Safety Strategy, we looked at how quickly it is for people who have been involved in crashes for emergency services to get to them, in case a crash has taken place. And it's quite a stark reality. If you see the dark green, that is the places where emergency services will be able to get to you in the case of an emergency. And it really like makes us not be able to win this road safety war due to the sparseness of the network and the services around that can be able to assist people who are involved in crashes. So in closing, the safe systems approach, it really works. And we need to really institute a safety culture and one that is mature within the South African public, the road users, engineering itself. Normally, people will be like, who cares? As long as I'm not caught, let me get away with it. Or if we are reactive, like safety is important, we do a lot every time there's a crash. When it's Easter, when it's Christmas, then we're quite reactive with our safety culture and our awareness. Or are we going to be calculative, where we have a system in place to manage the hazards, and proactive, where we have safety leadership and values drive continuous improvements, and where it's generative, where safety is how we naturally do things here in South Africa. The aim should be to produce a better quality citizen who cares about the environment and the person next to them as they do for themselves. And at the end of the day, as the program director said, a lot of it, we can do so much in engineering science, but a lot of it also involves human science and incorporating that in the way that we do things as engineers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakari. I think you touched on many concepts in that presentation. But what struck me is that if I have to just give a little bit of comment on what you said, is there's an equity issue. related to this topic of road safety. And it's maybe it's unique to our geography, but to some extent the continent as well. We had certain phenomena play out in the past that separated us as communities. And that has made travel time and associated risks significantly higher. And the unfortunate reality is what I picked up from you is that these road deaths are not as random as one would think it is. It tracks with poverty and historical disadvantage. The other thing is that I think what I want to bring to the fore is that we're losing 34 people a day on our roads in South Africa. Okay. That's a breadwinner, that's a father, that's a mother, that's a child. It's a future of someone that's gone, never to come back again. These things matter to us as researchers, colleagues, engineers, because we spend all our lives trying to make things safer. And sometimes you feel like you're not making the impact that you want to make. And that is why we are talking about it today. You also spoke about the patterns. The patterns keep reinforcing themselves. And what was important, in addition to what you said, is that we know about dissent. We know about this. These patterns are ongoing year after year. But what we learned was when COVID happened and how alcohol was no longer for sale. Well, most of it, it complied with the rules at the time. How road safety improved during the COVID restrictions. So that itself tells you that it was people. The circumstances that we found ourselves where we made very, very tough decisions, tough choices. We were forced into a regime of living. And in the process, there was a natural recovery in the environment. There was a natural improvement in road safety. I'm not saying we need to go back there, but it does say that we as people have a lot to do with what happens to our society. Okay, so moving on, I'd like to allow Ms. Busisiwe Marole, who's the transport researcher at the CSIR, to give her presentation, opening remarks. Busisiwe, all yours.
Thank you. Wait for Raj to sustain me. Thank you. Good morning. I think it's still morning.
Yes,
everyone. Yes. So I will be. My name, first of all, is Busisiwe Marole, as I've already been introduced from the CSIR. I will be presenting on the evidence on driving behavior and road safety trends in South Africa. So regarding, I'm just trying to navigate to move to the next slide. Apologies. So the outline of my presentation, I will give an overview on the road safety context, of which most of it Sekadi has already covered, and then human behavior and road environment, and then research data and technology, and then evidence-based interventions, which have already been highlighted, its relevance in this conversation, and then how to move from research to policy, and then future mobility and technology solutions for road safety, some of which are existing. And then I'll also give a highlight on some key takeaways that we can further discuss. So with regards to the road safety context, about 90% of fatal crashes in 2025 were caused by human factors. So our speaker, or rather our program director, highlighted that in previous years it was 80, so it shows that the number is going up. And then human behavior, which involves speeding and risk-taking, alcohol and substance impairment, driver distraction and mobile phone use, fatigue and drowsiness, and then also non-compliance with road rules and regulations, which also includes use of seat belts. All right, so I am not using my PC, so I do tend to struggle a bit, but yeah, just bear with me. So in terms of the vulnerable road users, we're looking at pedestrians, which in 2025, about 45% of those fatalities were pedestrians, some of which also include children and elderly pedestrians, and then cyclists and public transport users, motorcyclists and delivery riders, particularly that one which became more prominent during COVID and post-COVID, and then persons with disabilities and also scholar transport users. And then human behavior and road environment. Under this, we look at the safe systems approach, which was already highlighted by Sekadi. So basically, the safe systems approach considers the fact that human error is inevitable and seeks to prevent deaths and serious injuries by incorporating the 5 pillars, which are the safer roads, vehicles, speeds, road users, and post-crash care. These cannot be addressed in isolation, so they kind of need to be addressed simultaneously, because you can't focus on the one and leave the other, because they are interlinked in that way. And then when you look at the road geometry, signage, and lighting, these influence driver decisions, while self-explaining roads naturally encourage safer road use behavior. So in terms of self-explaining roads, maybe just to elaborate a bit on that, it's basically drivers don't have to be confused by decisions that they need to make in a road. So if you do, for example, see 2 lanes merging into one, that is automatically forcing the driver to reduce speed, because now traffic that was occupying 2 lanes needs to share a particular lane. So that is a traffic calming measure, alongside with your speed humps, your rubble strips. Those are components of the road that communicate something to the driver and force a particular behavior. So by self-explaining roads, that's basically the concept that we're highlighting. And then moving on. So with regards to research data and technology that is targeted to address road safety, we at the CSR have the Transport Safety Lab, which is composed of a driving simulator, and then we also have what we call a drive lab, which is basically an instrumented vehicle that has instruments or equipment that we use to conduct research. And then one of the components of our Transport Safety Lab, particularly in the drive lab, we have instrumented cameras that do driver eye tracking, and also have an forward-facing camera that basically looks at what is on the road. And so basically it records what is in the driving environment of the driver. And at the same time, the the driver-facing camera then focuses particularly on the pupil of the driver to see what they are looking at as they're driving and what hazards they're able to identify, basically where their attention is as they are driving, and basically their hazard perception. It also tries to address distracted driving, and then drowsiness detection, and then how they are interacting with the infrastructure, and signage testing. So the image that you see, which is, we call that sign fluorescent yellow-green signage, which is particularly prominent in most European countries. So basically it has been proven by research to be more effective, more visible, and commanding attention from the drivers. So in the South African context, these signs are not standard signs in the SASMA manual, but however, we only encounter them in work zones where there's road constructions or road improvements that are happening. So the study that we were doing as a CSR, we're trying to basically produce recommendations for these signs from the effectiveness experiments of these signs, so that we can recommend that they are included in the road signs manuals as standard signs, as they are proven to be effective. So one of our pilot studies that we did with the eye tracking, we identified that, so basically the two graphs, the one on the left is showing glance duration. So by glance, we mean looking at an object or a sign for a period of less than a second. And then the fixation, the graph on the right, is basically showing or representing the fixation, which is any duration more than a second. That's just how we defined it. So with that said, we basically, on the graph, you'll see the blue bar is basically showing the standard signage, and then the orange is showing the fluorescent yellow-green signage. We basically installed these signs within a controlled driving area, and then we incorporated participants to drive along that route, and then we basically measured through the eye tracking the duration at which they look at each of the signs versus, so we put them side by side, the standard sign and the fluorescent yellow-green sign. So basically, from the results, you can see with this particular slide, it's showing the distribution by age. So the 41 to 50 years age group had with the ones that glanced more on the signage, and then the group above older than 70 years, for instance, glanced very, very little. And then with the others, there was not that much significant difference. But then on the right, you see that the 41 to 50 years group they basically did not fixate. So they did not look at signs for more than a second. They just glanced and then continued driving. And then the age group, 61 to 70 years, they happened to fixate longer on the signage. And this could also be due to visual impairments that come with age. But so like I said, was a pilot study that we were doing to kind of see what type of results we can obtain. And then the next slide basically shows a distribution by gender, as Sekadi has already highlighted, risky behavior mostly being associated with males. We can see there on the left that the males glanced less at both the standard and the fluorescent yellow-green signage compared to the females. And then on the right, again, you can see that, again, the fixation, females fixated more or looked at the signs, both standard and fluorescent yellow-green signage, longer than the males. All right, so some of with the study that I was just highlighting, that was a pilot study that is to be taken out into more public roads so that we can measure those type of behavior or driver behaviors. Some of the other studies that we've been involved in are crash testing experiments that we've done in collaboration with our partners, wherein we were basically measuring road restraint systems like your barriers to see how much they restrain vehicles that crash into them, because their function is to prevent a vehicle from driving over or going off a cliff if driven into. So if they don't do that, then that means they are not serving the purpose that they need to. And at the same time, they are supposed to protect pedestrians that could be walking alongside, so that if a reckless driver sort of sways out of the road and crashes into the barrier, it does not affect the pedestrians. But unfortunately, with this study, we had dummy or rather dolls that were instrumented with sensors that were placed as pedestrians to be able to see what happens to them when, and basically formulating a South African context where some people even tend to use them as a bench, they'll sit on those barriers. So to sort of see what happens when a vehicle crashes, then what did happen was the pedestrians were severely affected, which were the dummy pedestrians. And then even in the vehicle, we were also testing the in-vehicle restraint, which is your seatbelt. So to see that at different speeds, how much restraining happens to the driver when the vehicle crashes. And with the dummies having sensors, we're able to measure the motion and impact that they had due to the crash. So those are some of the crash testing experiments that we are involved in partnership. So with this slide, basically, it's just showing some of the ongoing research that we have. I'm not sure if I'm still moved on to the next slide. I'm not sure if it's disconnected. Just give it a moment. I think I'm disconnected. Okay, back on. Share. Apologies for that. Yes, we're back online. All right, so I hope I'm audible. Okay, so as I was saying, we have a couple of ongoing research that we do. So I've already spoken to the fluorescent yellow-green signage experiments versus how the drivers respond with the eye tracking devices. And then we have also a traffic conflict mitigation tool, which we are developing in-house. As Sikari also highlighted, that at intersections, some intersections actually have higher conflict points. And we are trying to use this tool to be able to quantify the crash risks at those intersections. And then also provide recommendations for what alternative engineering can be done with those intersections. And then we've also been working on the delivery motorcycle studies. I think I skipped the last one, which is I've already spoken to the crash testing restraint studies that we do. So these are projects that are ongoing that we do annually. So with regards to evidence-based interventions, as was highlighted earlier, we are aware of our partners that work on things like your targeted behavioral campaigns, which we do also get involved, and then the school road safety programs, and then the improvement of the driver training with the K53 reform, and then fatigue management programs, and then enhanced enforcement and speed management. And then also with regards to incentives for good driving behavior, we are aware of entities that drive these, and we do believe that these interventions are quite impactful. And then how do we move from research to policy? We believe that integrating crash data health enforcement and infrastructure data would be useful. That at a crash incident, we don't have the EMS collecting their own data, which is different from SAPS, different from insurance and so on. There needs to be some sort of database that puts the data in one, I would say, database for that matter. And then the different entities are able to see how these things correlate with each other at for an example, at a crash incident. And then also we do support evidence-based decision-making, which is why most of our research is to inform government entities and policies that need to be enhanced or changed. And then we also believe in enabling risk mapping and performance monitoring, which is very much dependent on the quality of data, because if we don't have good data, we will be solving the wrong problems. And then to inform infrastructure planning and design. So basically working alongside with industry, consultant, engineers, so that we are basically from our research able to inform how basically the standards that they need to use in infrastructure. And then strengthen road safety audits and legislation, support public awareness campaigns, and enhance stakeholder collaboration. We believe that stakeholder collaboration is also important because in a room, there needs to be representation of all the various fields that are affected or have some level of influence into road safety. And then with regards to future technologies, that are some of them actually already existing that can resolve or address what's the driver road safety issues. We have driver monitoring systems, advanced driver assistance systems, artificial intelligence and predictive risk modeling, connected vehicles and vehicle to everything communication, smart traffic management systems, human-centered infrastructure design, real-time safety analytics. So we believe that this innovation or some of these technologies are useful and very core to moving in the right direction when it comes to addressing road safety. Some of these, like I mentioned, are already existing. There are vehicles that are instrumented, for instance, with the ADS, which is the Advanced Driver Assistance Systems, where if they identify an object on the road, they do self-braking and so on. So we as a CSR try to involve ourselves, or rather align ourselves with what's happening in terms of the innovation and the 4IR. And in our research that we do, we basically piggyback off of this as well. And also test it for the South African context, because we have experienced how many some of these technologies that are developed abroad, when we bring them in the South African context, there are some issues that do not really match what those technologies are supposed to perform. So yeah, it is. We believe it's important to localize some of these technologies. Some key takeaways would be that, again, human behavior remains a major contributor to crashes, and infrastructure does shape behavior. Research and technology support good governance. And lastly, evidence-based interventions, we believe, are essential. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Do you mind putting that last slide up, if you don't mind? Because I'd just like to just make a comment on it, because I'm looking at what we have said already. The first one I picked up is behavior matters. Okay. Sekari spoke about legacy urban design. Okay. There's infrastructure gaps currently in the transport system anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll add another one, enforcement of compliance. Okay. All of these things are sort of feeding into each other, creating an ecosystem that is morphing into something that is difficult to get a handle on. your comment on technology gives some hope that technology could be like the vehicles that you speak about that have this technology is more on the higher end.
Yeah.
But hopefully in time to come, it will be in all vehicles. So that might help along the way where vehicles don't bump into each other and don't bump into people. The other thing I wanted to make us aware of is that you spoke a lot about data. And it was interesting when I did my own sort of looking at data, is that 60% of our fatal accidents happen between Friday and Sunday. Okay? I think you can work out why. Okay. The second thing is 40% of these fatalities happen between 4 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. Okay. And then we have the seasonal fatalities that we spoke about already. And it leads me to segue into the next speaker, because what I also found was that the corridors where these crashes happen, the Joburg to KZN route, the Gauteng to Limpopo corridor is one. And that's where it allows me to segue into our next speaker, who is from Limpopo. So maybe she can help us, with some real contributions on what happens on that corridor. And I'd like to allow Ms. Matabo Masekela, who's online, to please make representation on your part, Ms. Masekela, from the Roads Agency Limpopo. And she has unfortunately been not able to join us in person and has kindly joined us online.
Thank you, Chair. I'm struggling to. Okay, I can do that now. Are the slides visible to everyone?
Yes.
All right. It is quite an honor to be part of this conversation, and I'm quite grateful to SAF, Saeed, and the moderator for being part of this conversation. The presentation that I will be giving will be on the influence of infrastructure on driver behavior, but particularly I will be focusing on the role of infrastructure planning and provincial mobility systems in supporting improved road safety outcomes. Statistically, it has been mentioned that between 80% to 90% of road accidents are due to human behavior and driver error. What I'm saying is that that doesn't happen in isolation, but it is part of a wider system. And there are other influencing agents and factors that would result with a road user behavior. And one of that is infrastructure, and that is where I will be focusing. But there is also enforcement and vehicles as well that do contribute to the behavior of the road users. The previous speakers mentioned a concept of safe systems approach, and I won't go deeper into it. However, safe system approach seeks to address these agents' behavior, infrastructure, enforcement, and vehicles, and it knows that humans will make mistakes. We are fallible by nature, and we do tend to make mistakes. And we are vulnerable as well. When we get into accidents, our body cannot handle the stress. In the midst of this, death and serious injuries are unacceptable and must be avoided. However, that can only be achieved if there is a shared responsibility by all agents and road users. Oftentimes, we speak of road safety only during the operational stage of a road when there are vehicles driving on it. However, road safety should start at the planning stage, the inception of a road. Once a need is identified that we need a road in this location, that is where the land use must be considered. The type of people who will be making use of the road. Is the road near a school? And as such, to assess the risks inherent in providing the road infrastructure, and to also assist in prioritizing which roads to maintain or which one to construct. It doesn't stop there. It moves into design stage, where we use engineering standards to then design the roads for at a level that is safe, and to ensure that they are self-explanatory and forgiving in nature. Then there is construction, where post-construction, that is when we find a road, and if it was not constructed accordingly, that road would be unsafe. However, it doesn't stop there. It also continues into maintenance, and maintenance assists us in keeping roads infrastructure in a safe operating condition. And I must indicate that I'm quite pleased with the National Department of Transport. They have begun mandating road safety audits at all these various stages to be done at provincial level. And that is also indicated in the Division of Revenue Act, where PRMG funding is allocated. Coming from Limpopo, which can be considered a rural province, there are safety challenges that we experience, and there are also opportunities that exist within those challenges. These challenges are vast, but they are not only applicable to Limpopo province, they can be applied to all rural provinces and also provincial roads as a whole. As the province, we note that there are quite a high accident zones that were identified within the province, and there were quite a number of accidents that were reported in the previous 3 years that resulted in numerous fatalities. This was an accident where a bus, and this is also an accident hotspot, where a taxi was caught between two trucks, and the fatalities there were 12, and this happened around the R81. There's also the bus that was on its way to Mozambique that resulted in 42 fatalities, and this also happened in October 2025. This is also happening at a spot that we know to be a high accident zone spot. And there is the incident that happened in 2024 as well, during April, the Easter period, where a bus from Botswana lost control, and it resulted in 43 fatalities. It is quite important to note where these high accident zones are from a planning perspective, and to come up with remedial measures on how to make the roads and these high accident zones safer. There is an issue of long travel distances. We find that the villages are, a number of them are far from the social services, but also far from economic hubs. And there is a long distance travel that needs to be made by citizens to reach these services. The longer one is on the road, the more likelihood that an accident would happen. We have pedestrian issues. You will find, and you might have experienced this as well, driving through Limpopo, is that there is insufficient provision of pedestrian walkways. And that also puts a risk to school children and to pedestrian and all other vulnerable users as a whole. We have an issue of livestock, which becomes problematic at night when visibility is low. There have been a number of accidents that occurred due to livestock presence on the road. Most of our roads, gravel roads, we're looking at about 66% of the road network being gravel, and most of them, we find that during rainy seasons, they become flooded, and there is a lot of remedial action that is then required. So there is also a safety issue as a whole lot of people within the province do make use of gravel roads. Then there is the maintenance backlog that we experience. And this brings me to quite an important discussion that behavior, it is not only modeled by infrastructure, but it is also modeled by the level of maintenance that is provided. Equitable road maintenance is very important for ensuring that safety for all road users and for road to be functionally optimal. There is no maintenance is not only to restore roads to its functional condition, but it is also to provide a safe space within which road users can fulfill their goals. In essence, maintenance goes far beyond just improving the condition of the road, but it is also a safety responsibility that it is done. The maintenance backlog is quite huge in most provinces, not just Limpopo. And I just want to bring to the picture that in Limpopo, we're looking at about 14 billion that is required to keep the road network at an acceptable level. And this is only looking at the paved roads. And in comparison, the budget that we receive is between 400 million and 700 a year, which is very far from the required budget to maintain our roads optimally. These challenges that we are facing, they may seem to be more and significant, but they also allow us to have targeted intervention where high risks exist, such as for long travel distances, including rest stops on the way and provision of pedestrian walkways to deal with pedestrians, and even the usage of ensuring that usage of gates to ensure that livestock is kept from the roads. We've mentioned many times that the cause of road accidents is usually mostly is the driver behavior and road user behavior. And infrastructure does contribute to what behavior a driver will model. The road design in itself influences various things. It influences the speed choice. It influences overtaking behavior. It influences crossing behavior, driver attention, and compliance. If we were to provide a road in a pedestrian dense area without providing sidewalks, we're encouraging pedestrians to walk on the roadway. And if we were to provide a road without line markings or where line markings are faded, we also encourage drivers to drive in the wrong lane or opposing lane. The issue of maintenance also comes into play where you will find that there are a number of potholes in the road. And in this case, road drivers would want to swerve to avoid the pothole, but that usually results in accidents. They also, if a designer or a road authority provides a road that is long and doesn't have curbs, it encourages the driver to drive on higher speeds. So what we provide as road designer and engineers influences what behavior the driver would explaining roads, and Sekati touched on that earlier, that roads should be designed and constructed in a way that a road user instinctively knows how to behave by just looking at the layout of the road. It should not be complex, it should not be different from any other road.
Hey,
We lost her.
I think we've lost Ms. Masakela. Did we try to get her back on? I think she was onto something quite important. Okay. So while she's getting back on, you would have noticed that she presented the narrative around young kids going to school. I'd just like to share something with you, and I know we're getting a little bit statistic heavy, but I think it's important to note that 80% of the people in this country are moved by minibus taxis. Okay. Now, for those of us that have cars and have the luxury to drive ourselves, we may find ourselves frustrated by minibus taxis and their behaviors. Agree? Now, that phenomenon will continue to play itself out. Okay, and whether you decide to fight the system or hoot or do all weird and wonderful things to disrupt themselves, to disrupt the minibus taxis, I think we need to look past that. My contribution towards that is that we have this phenomenon where they play such a vital role in providing transport solutions. Okay, I wouldn't say the most affordable, because Prasa is coming online and it's becoming a cheaper move of people. But be that as it may, at the moment, the train market share is at 16%. Sorry, it's at 3%. The bus market share is at 16%. Okay, the balance is the minibus taxis. Now, what I'd like to share with you, and it's something to think about because we're going to get into the discussion session just now, is that we have not planned our road infrastructure to cater for minibus taxis. And that is why we get frustrated with the way they behave. They are offering almost door-to-door. Wouldn't say exactly door-to-door, but almost door-to-door. And that service is unlikely to change in any time soon. The passenger train service will come online in some years to come. I think we've got, they're probably targeting 500,000 trips per annum in the next 2 to 3 years. But that still doesn't take away the phenomenon of minibus taxis, and it's not even meant to compete with. So that role that they will play will continue. So what I'm putting forward as a concept to the panel perhaps is that we should think about planning for this phenomenon of minibus taxis, where they stop. I don't think we involve them in planning, because they're exactly where things work and where things don't for themselves. We also plan, new towns and communities without even catering for them, for their facilities. And this goes back to the equity issue and the integrated plan that we talk about. That's perhaps not as integrated as we would like it. So I'm not saying that that's the right answer. I'm just saying that I think planning of infrastructure, which Ms. Matsakola was alluding to, needs to be rethought. A lot of things have been left to happen and grow organically, whilst others have been ignored. And the consequence of that is what we are feeling. And it might be an area of additional research or additional planning, where we have to rethink how we plan communities. We have heard over and over again the distances people have to travel. Maybe there's something there that we need to work on, and that is from an infrastructure side. But that becomes now part of that integrated discussion that we spoke about, where are we really looking after people? Because if 80% of our country moves on minibus taxis, shouldn't there be the dominant infrastructure planner phenomenon? Shouldn't we introduce planning for that kind of phenomenon instead of fighting? If you look at the cost invested per person in minibus taxi, is orders of magnitude lower than the cost per person in a BRT system, or the cost per person in a Gautrain, or even in a car for that matter. But yet they move the most amount of people and they keep this economy going. But we don't plan for that. I'm just putting it out there, something that may be controversial, but it is something that I don't understand why we don't plan effectively for them as a primary mover of people in a public transport system. But we will expand airports at billion rand of cost, cater for movement. But if you look at the cost per person, it's astronomically higher than a minibus taxi.
Ms. Maskela's back on, but you can ask her if she'd like us to put a presentation up, and then she can just move through it.
Yeah. Ms. Masakela, you triggered a lot of thinking. We did not lose the time that you were offline. Are you happy to proceed with your presentation and complete it, because it was bringing to the fore very useful concepts, and I just get the feeling that I think you should be allowed to end your presentation on your terms.
Thank you. I hope technology allows me to do that. Let me share the presentation again.
That phenomenon sits in the cloud, unfortunately, which we cannot touch at the moment. So let's hope. Please proceed. We can see it.
You can see it, all right. So as I was talking about self-explaining roads and that roads must be forgiving in nature, I don't know at what point I got cut, but in essence, I was alluding to the fact that when humans do make errors, infrastructure should be designed and constructed in such a manner that it will reduce the severity of that accident. For example, should one drive off the road, there should not be a structure within the road reserve which would increase the likelihood of serious injuries. So that is what we mean by self-explaining roads. Infrastructure does not just provide connectivity, but it does silently communicate what behavior the road user should show. The previous speakers spoke a lot about evidence-informed approaches that can support safer and more sustainable mobility outcome. And one such approach that has been studied is the safe systems approach, which both the previous speakers touched on, and the better use of data to make data-informed decisions in terms of where investment goes. We did a study in 2021 here in Limpopo to understand the reason for the high accident zones that we experience. However, we had a huge problem in accessing accident data, and that is because it is haphazard and it is owned by different institutions. There is no central place where that data can be accessed. And that data is very important because it assists us in performing risk-based infrastructure planning, understanding who uses roads and who needs to be accommodated, cyclists, or all types of vulnerable road users. And also we can integrate risk safety into mobility planning. I've indicated, I think in the second slide, that NDOT is really working And your team, being the National Department of Transport, is really working in making sure that provinces do integrate road safety in their mobility systems and also in their asset management systems, which we've started doing, and it is proving quite useful as we can now understand better what is happening within certain routes. Technology and predictive planning cannot be avoided, and they promise to be useful tools in combating road accidents and fatalities and in increasing road safety on our network. So there are various types of technologies that exist that can be used, and the previous speaker discharged on some of those. In concluding, we say that infrastructure planning is a road safety intervention. It is not just for road provision, but we also have to look at road safety issues that may arise from the provision of that infrastructure. Rural and provincial contexts require tailored solutions. There are different challenges that we face, which are different from what the urban environment does experience. And if we were to take what is done in urban environments and bring it to rural provinces, it might not suffice in achieving road safety. Infrastructure influences behavior, and that has been the main talk and point of my presentation, and that we need to also understand who the users of our roads will be, who are vulnerable road users, and how can we prioritize them within the road network provision. Integrated mobility planning will improve safety outcome, and evidence and data should drive decisions. I think we are done with the times where we guessed in terms of where to give infrastructure and in what manner. But now there is a lot of evidence and data that can be used to direct investment. And safer roads require safer systems. And this goes on looking at road safety as a system from behavior to infrastructure to enforcement. This all makes the road safer, and it's a system that we need to uphold and maintain as a country and a province. This is the end of the presentation.
Thank you. I've sort of in a way given some summaries around what you have spoken about, Mrs. Taylor, and I think we can now swiftly move on to Dr. Randall. You've heard the numbers, you've heard the infrastructure stories, you've heard all of the problems, Dr. Randall, and yeah, maybe we look forward to your contributions around understanding what drives this behavioral phenomenon in road safety, and what should be some of the things we need to think about so that we can start doing something different to help make a positive impact. Whilst we all are here ready to do something, but what is it that needs to be done and in what order? And maybe you can help us unpack that, if you don't mind, through your presentation. You are welcome now to take lead. Thank you.
Thank you all, and a very particular thank you for the media being here, because you are the voice that amplifies these concepts. I think that the previous three presenters have provided a solid chunk of evidence with no contradictions between them. It's been a building process. My role, coming from civil society, from an NGO, is going to be a bit provocative. I'm going to throw some coals into the fire. I'm hoping to get you thinking a little differently and about what we do with the scientific knowledge. We, as the Road Ethics Project, we aim to foster ethical literacy around road use, road design. And we operate mostly in virtual space. We get into people's headspaces. We try to shift paradigms in a way that can actually save lives, change behavior, and reduce life-changing injuries. So I'm going to run quite quickly through a bunch of slides which contain some provocations. And I just want to say, Vishal, I totally agree with you around the minibus taxi industry. That is where I stepped into the road safety world. Having worked with crash survivors, minibus taxi drivers included in that client load, I heard the story from their side, and that's what drew me to go beyond the moral outrage that the public tended to be expressing towards minibus taxi drivers and say, but why? And is it justified that they are singled out for this degree of moral outrage? And that's why my PhD took a bioethical approach. I just want to also start with a bit of contextualizing. So we are in the closing stages of the decade of action for road safety. I'm sure many of the media members are aware of this. What you may not be aware of is that we as a world dismally failed in the first decade of action for road safety. The same target was then set. Let's halve road deaths and serious injuries over a 10-year period. We got nowhere near that. We're now about 1,112 days away from the end of the second decade of action. And the same goal is in place. Let's achieve #50 by 30. In other words, reduce serious injuries and deaths by 50% by the year 2030. We in South Africa are a very long way from achieving that. As you heard, we have 34 deaths a day on average on our roads. We are squishy, frail creatures, and I know that as an occupational therapist because I see the consequences of people meeting metal at a speed with a force beyond what the human body can actually withstand. And we have to take very seriously the fact that even to participate in the road system, we've got to actually be quite highly constructed human beings to be able to safeguard ourselves. And what that means is we need to be trained and educated about road risks. We've got to be properly licensed if we're going to be driving vehicles. We've got to be insightful about crash risks. We talk about the fatal five. How many members of the public can immediately list what are the fatal five, the most critical risk factors that result in deaths? People also need to be mentally and physically fit to drive. But above all, we have to be morally or ethically responsible. And Sakadi already said, we've got to have a sense of ethics around the road infrastructure, the road environment, not just around human behavior. So I'm going to keep putting an ethical slant on some of these road safety issues. The greater power your mode of transport has must be associated with greater responsibility. The driver of a Pantechnicon is always faced with greater moral responsibility for their own and other people's safety than, for instance, the person at the top of that hierarchy, the person on foot with no great big metal structure around them. And the fact of the matter is people are at different levels of ethical or moral development. And I've hopelessly oversimplified it here. But what we do talk about is that we have moral toddlers. They are very me, mine oriented. They're very egoistic. And unless they get caught, you know, the example of a toddler with his hand in the cookie jar, he only recognizes that he's done something wrong when mom comes in and catches him in the act and says to him, that's for everybody. Get your hand out of the cookie jar. So unfortunately on the roads, we do have moral toddlers. They put their own needs first and they think it's fine as long as they get away with it. And then we have moral teenagers. Now we know about teenagers. They get into a herd mentality. Everybody else is doing it, so I'm going to do it as well. Whatever that is, drinking and then driving or speeding, for instance. And also they, as teenagers in their development, they have a sense of rules and order and a need for some sort of social compact. but it's still rather primitive. So they engage in what we call simple deontology, or simple approaches to law-abiding behavior. For instance, the law allows me to drive at 60, therefore I will drive at 60, even though it's misty, dark, the road is slippery, there are pedestrians and livestock. There's a simple deontology rather than a mature ethical reasoning. And then, unfortunately, those who study moral or ethical development tell us that only about 15% of people reach a stage that is akin to being a moral grown-up. And that involves having some ethics of care, recognizing the broader community that we're part of, recognizing the greater good or utilitarianism. And I like to use the example of Ubuntu ethics, that my humanity depends on your humanity and your humanity depends on mine. And we are all part of a communitarian system. And if we forget that, then we are regressing in our moral maturity or moral development. Sikadi said it well as well. She said, we lack safety culture maturity in South Africa, and that is absolutely true. And the stages of ethical development that people are at is really important from a road safety perspective. And then I want to also mention, and this is not to antagonize the engineers. I love engineers. You have huge power to do good and create safety. But Prof. Wes Marshall from University of Denver in Colorado in the States has written this book called Killed by a Traffic Engineer. And basically he's saying, be careful, there's not that much science underneath some of what we do as traffic engineers, or the science that is there is not keeping up to date sufficiently. People tend to love him or hate him. He's actually a trainer of civil engineers, so he's very much steeped in the field. And he rather painfully came to the realization of how much damage is done when, as has been said by other speakers, we don't put our priorities in the correct place. Only 25% of users really catered for in South African road traffic system design. That is scary, and it explains a lot about how we are producing so many crashes and really not doing well in terms of road safety. So as a road ethicist, and this is my made-up term for myself, I had to give myself a label. As I moved beyond just being an occupational therapist, I called myself a road ethicist. And the early philosophers, or the first ethicists, would ask, how should society live together? How should people behave towards each other in order to have a good life? And very much that is what we as the Road Ethics Project are asking. How do we use the road traffic system together when our use of it is so diverse? I mean, those are just some photographs, and even down at the bottom, the zebras crossing the road, we often forget that we are not the only species caught up in the system. And if you have a look at the recycling trolley pusher or trolley puller, those people perform a very valuable social service, but do we design our road for them? Our 1.2 or 1.3 meter free flow pedestrian speed that seems to govern a lot of our road design doesn't take into account that somebody may be pushing or pulling 200 or 300 kilograms, and doing it with one end being saving landfill space and promoting some environmental responsibility. They tend to be universally hated, and yet they do a valuable service. And we've got to design around those kinds of realities in South Africa. So non-motorized travel, and you've heard this from the previous presenters, it presents a specific and acute ethical crisis. So non-motorized users, they are by definition vulnerable. Therefore, they actually deserve and require greater protection. And I include in non-motorized travelers those, for instance, who get into a bus or a minibus taxi. They themselves are not in charge of the motorized element of how they travel. They are vulnerable too, just like pedestrians and cyclists. Non-motorized deaths and injuries. disproportionately affect the poor. And you've heard a lot about the reasons why. And therefore, we entrench poverty. We repeat cycles of poverty because they are most at risk in our system. And the drain on GDP is really significant. It takes away from resources which could be spent on other development priorities, as some of the other speakers have pointed out. But quite apart from economic costs, the human suffering cost is absolutely enormous. I see situations where children suffer a life-changing injury at a young age, and basically the cost factor of their disability, the burden of care that falls on their family is absolutely enormous and keeps parents, for instance, at times out of the labor market. Also, we see, I do some medical legal work, I see road accident survivors, and I'm going to come back to the word accident a bit later. Very often they have not received adequate treatment, rehab. Their compensation is incredibly delayed, and by the time it comes, it might be less effective than it would have been if it was timeliest. Now, that is a huge cost to society, both in human suffering and in things like loss of productivity. And then most fundamentally, and this has been said already by previous presenters, it's simply an ethical crisis that we are not preventing these events, which are preventable. And even if we can't prevent 100% of crashes, we can at least make those that occur more optimizable. In other words, easier to survive, less injurious, less damaging. The Africa Status Report on Road Safety last year showed that in Africa as a whole, about 31% of fatalities are amongst people on foot, and another few percent are amongst people on bikes and motorcycles. But if you have a look at the last bar there, if you can see the figure above it, it's a question mark. There are many fatalities where there isn't even data on who this person who died was. Were they on foot? Were they on a motorcycle? Were they in a minibus taxi? And so in Africa, we have a great big question around exactly who is dying on the roads of the continent. In South Africa, we have enough data to know that at any given time, around 40+% of fatalities on our roads are pedestrians, and in the cities, that is hitting 60% in some respects. And it's very much because we, in Africa and in South Africa, we've absolutely prioritized the movement of motorized vehicles over vulnerable road users. And yet, as you've heard, 70% or more of road users in Africa are pedestrians or other type of vulnerable road users. And they account for the highest proportion of fatalities. And as our cities rapidly urbanize, the problem is actually getting worse. Just also to put this in context with very recent developments globally, we're facing a geopolitical crisis. If you look at the table on the left, it's probably hard to read, but go right down to the bottom and you will see a tiny little red block, and that represents South Africa's fuel reserves. Now, countries are advised to have at least 90 days of fuel in reserve, and we are rock bottom, actually along with Australia, in terms of this graph, which was provided in a Financial Mail article quite soon after the Middle East conflict erupted. We're potentially in a worse situation now. And if you look on the right, that photograph can't even attribute it to anyone because it did the rounds on WhatsApp groups. But it's humorous. It's South African humor. Yeah. You know, the fuel price, we can't even talk about what the price is, just walk. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, we need people to travel on foot, and the world is awake to that. This is from a survey by the World Resources Institute, where they asked a very large sample of people representing all sorts of different countries, are you concerned about climate change? And 80% said yes. And then they asked, well, what climate-friendly choices do you think people should be making that will make the biggest difference to carbon emissions per person per year. And what I've done there is I've highlighted in blue and with the labels at the left, the transport-related choices. And of all the choices that people recommended, go car-free was absolutely top and would have the most impact in terms of reducing emissions. Then there were some things like fly less, use electric vehicles or at least hybrid cars, walk, bike, or use public transport, or at the very least carpool. Don't be a single occupant in the traffic, because therefore you are creating part of the problem rather than solving it. And then #11, telecommute. I mean, COVID really taught us the possibilities. And a meeting like this, with many people telecommuting rather than physically coming, this is supported as a climate-friendly choice. So we've got to make our road system safe so that people can exercise these kinds of choices. Okay, so just moving along, what can members of the media do? And I had to present my wish list, my utopian vision of what you guys as members of the media can do as amplifiers of both the scientific voice and the community desires. And I've given you 7 things to chew on, and I'm going to unpack them with an example per 1 or 2 examples per item on the list. So number 1, you might have heard people say this before. Say it like it is. Use the term crash, not accident. And I'll come back a little bit later to why that can be justified and is a global movement already. And I think the South African media would do really well to start falling in with that. And you would shift public consciousness if you started using the term crash, not accident. Then number 2, engage in solutions-focused journalism. Give full pictures. Say what can be done differently. Don't just report on crashes without also injecting some possibilities of, we don't have to live with these things. This is not part of the natural order. This is something that we as society can tackle. There's evidence. Other countries have death rates as low as 2 per 100,000 people. We're sitting at 18 or 19 per 100,000 people. We can move ourselves down that spectrum. It takes an all-of-society approach, and members of the media can play a really important role. Then number 3, linked to that, be balanced. So report on positive developments. Don't just get caught up in the tragic and sensational stories, even if they sell. Nowadays, there's a lot of media that's available to the public for free. So inject the positive, give the balance. Number 4, think long-term. So follow up on the human interest stories, the crash consequences, the legal outcomes, and also the fact that over time we are improving. The globe is improving and South Africa is improving. Give that long-term focus. Along with that, number 5, think deeper. Frame your reporting of crashes using things like Vision Zero, which says we've got to aim for zero. Might take us 100 years to get there, but that is the ethical target. Try not to injure and kill people in our road traffic system. And also the safe system approach. So even in your reporting, be awake to the broader system. Don't just report the incident, look at how it intersects with other factors. And then number 6, be critical. And I'm going to come back and justify this, why I say this. Don't fall into the trap of using what I'm going to call contrived terms, a term in fact invented by the motor trade in the 1920s in the US when Henry Ford started mass producing motor vehicles, needed them to sell, and people were resistant to motor vehicles because they were killing pedestrians, especially children. And the media, unfortunately, got co-opted by the motor trade, which provided very juicy material and coined the term jaywalker to describe what they said was an unsophisticated pedestrian who doesn't know how to behave around this new phenomenon of motor vehicles. A J was a country bumpkin. And by attaching the word J to walking, they criminalized a whole category. In fact, all of us, because all of us are pedestrians at times. So I'll come back to why you should be careful when you use terms like that, even though our Minister of Transport uses them and they're in our legal framework. Be very careful as the media to not be critical. And then keep up to date. There is so much happening in the mobility scene, all sorts of new developments. And with that, some very worrying new road risks. And I'll come back to two or three examples. For instance, e-scooters. Our university towns like Stellenbosch are starting to see a proliferation of e-scooters. As has been mentioned, we've got a proliferation of delivery motorcycle drivers. This is a worrying new risk. It's changing the traffic mix. What is the safety implication of that? And then also we've got self-driving cars, not so much yet in this country, but they're coming. And we have things like an enormous shift of freight from rail to road in recent years in South Africa. So let's have a look quickly at some examples. Number one, crash not accident. How on earth am I asking you to make this terminology shift? Well, as far back as 2001, the British Medical Journal started refusing scientific articles that used the term accident on grounds that accident implies something unforeseeable, unpreventable, completely out of the blue, unusual, no blame to be attached. And the British Medical Journal was the first, Lancet, American Medical Journal followed, and many others have copied them over the last 25, 30, 26 years. Because it's simply an inappropriate label to give the events in which people die and are seriously injured. Those are predictable, they are preventable. So it's far better to call them crashes or call them collisions than imply that they're accidental. Unfortunately, it is embedded in our language. When I was doing my research with taxi drivers, I had to allow in the interview transcripts the term accident, because taxi accident, we almost use as if it's one joint term. South Africans are very familiar with the term. It's in our road accident fund and other legislation. But you guys have the power to change dialogue, challenge terminology, and just get people thinking and talking differently about it. Then number two on my wish list is, just get my wish list up front, engage in solutions-focused journalism. And one way you can do that is using the kind of framework which I used in my analysis of minibus taxi safety. It comes from Jessica Neelan Fahlquist, a philosopher from Sweden, and she says moral responsibility for road safety is a shared responsibility. Now, you hear that all the time, especially in the festive season and the Easter season. It's a shared responsibility. But she says it's not just shared amongst stakeholders, there are also different types of responsibility, and she breaks it down to three. And I'm going to use the example of a taxi crash. Blame responsibility. What happened? A private vehicle hit this taxi from the side, or the taxi driver jumped a red traffic light, or robot as we call them. There is blame responsibility. That's legitimate to talk about. It could be speed, it could be drunk driving, it could be distracted driving due to mobile phone use. Blame responsibility is a legitimate concept, but are we digging deeper? Why did the taxi driver jump the red robot? Why did somebody use a mobile phone while driving? Because society condones it and people don't understand the degree of risk. In the case of the taxi driver, the passengers might be pushing that person, go faster. I want to get to work on time. I want to get to the bold and beautiful, is what some of the taxi drivers told me. My passengers demand that of me. But fundamentally, and again, I'll use the taxi sector as an example. They are chasing money all the time. They have to pay the owners of the vehicle at the end of the day. They also pay for fuel, minor repairs, taxi washing every day or two. And they have to allow money for their own licenses, for bribes, unfortunately, and for fines. So the taxi drivers, and this is not a South African reality alone, this kind of what we call paratransit form of transport. It could be motorcycle taxis in one African city. It could be rickshaws in an Asian city. These systems that involve paying dues over to the owner of the vehicle are highly, highly dangerous. UN Habitat a few years ago said if we could just tackle minibus taxi safety in Africa, we would radically shift the needle on road deaths and serious injuries. So you as the media, dig a bit deeper. Why? Why did that happen? And then the third category of responsibility that Jessica Neelan-Falquist talks about is very much in line with solutions-focused journalism. It's forward-looking responsibility. So this happened. How do we prevent it happening again? And our road authorities need to be exercising that kind of thinking, and so do members of the public, road users, and you as journalists can really, really highlight that. Then my wish list number 3, be balanced. Don't just report on the tragic and the sensational, report also on the good stuff that's happening. For instance, did you know in April in Joburg at the Sandton Convention Center, a whole bunch of African transport ministers were in the room and jointly endorsed the Pan-African Plan for Active Mobility. Now, this plan is all about how do we make it safer for people, especially in Africa, to walk and to cycle and to travel by public transport. This is a fantastic development. And the African Road Safety Charter, without South Africa's signature yet, but with 15 other countries in Africa signing, the Road Safety Charter, therefore, is now binding on the whole continent. The media need to highlight things like that because it's going to, it may take time, it will take time, but it's going to start shifting our road safety scenario. And then on my bucket list, number 4, think long term. So don't just report on the immediate moment. So I've given an example of the Vanderbijl Park Scholar Transport crash, which we all would have read about, seen on video, seen on TV at the time. 12 kids died in that crash on the scene. They were basically pulverized. The taxi was hit by a tipper truck. It was a massive high-speed crash, and 12 kids died on the scene. And there was lots of reporting on that. And I've just picked out one example of a reporter who went a little bit further because a 13th child died in hospital or en route to hospital. And in fact, ultimately, the death toll was 40. There's a lot to report about in an event like that. Don't drop the story. Keep following it like a dog with a bone. And paint the human picture. That picture of 12 kids, those were the 12 who died on the scene instantaneously. There were other deaths. Paint that picture. Even the picture of why did the driver behave as he did? And his father, the owner of the vehicle, what went on in the lead up to that crash? And you can create that long-term picture that otherwise members of the public will maybe glance at, but not fixate on, as I think it was Brucey talking about. You've got to fixate on something long enough to take it in and respond appropriately. And the media can do that. Grab the public attention on a long-term level, not just an immediate sensationalist level. And then also think deeper. Use systems thinking, and I'm glad the lady from Limpopo also used this picture, you will have noticed. It was a devastating crash, and there was a perfect storm of causation factors. The bus was overloaded, as we now know. The bus was pulling a huge trailer, as we now know. That trailer was loaded not only with passengers' luggage, but also with medications, which seemed to be a case of possible cross-border smuggling. The bus company was not registered properly. It doesn't have a call center. It didn't have a passenger manifest. It didn't have next of kin details for every passenger. There were 3 drivers on board. It was a very long trip. I think it was from Gqeberha to Harare and then on to Malawi. Very long trip. So correctly, they had 3 drivers on board. All 3 died in the crash. So it's hard to get any insight, except that some of the passengers said there was speeding involved. It was night. Now, what I noticed is recently there was another crash reported by the media. And what caught my attention was the name Ingwe Lodge, which told me that it was the same vicinity as this crash just a few months before. Now, this is a perfect storm, and we need to start understanding the linkages. Is this passenger transport, or is it illegal goods transport, or have the two been melded together? Why, 2 months after a new public regulation on cross-border buses came into existence, why were things not being followed? For instance, the new regulation requires front-facing cameras and rear-facing cameras, every passenger to be seat-belted in. That bus got stopped by traffic cops, apparently more than once. I don't know the facts, but apparently more than once. And it was not picked up that there were 91 passengers in a 60-seater bus, nor was there policing of the seatbelt laws. So you as the media can really think deeper and paint a deeper picture for members of the public. And then I mentioned be critical about certain terms. You probably are aware of the George Floyd story from the States. The policing of jaywalking laws in the States has been known to be racially tainted and particularly directed at low-income communities. And George Floyd was literally murdered by an overzealous traffic cop. And you might have seen footage of the Black Lives Matter protests which broke out in the States. And we, I think, have a lot of the same dynamics here, where low-income communities are sometimes policed in a more draconian way, whereas elites, and I'm thinking blue light convoys, for instance, get away with some incredibly dangerous behavior without being labeled or being found guilty of criminal offenses. And Bloomberg Philanthropies, which has been deeply involved in road safety over many decades, they literally recommended in October 2020, after the George Floyd incident, jaywalking laws themselves are a problem. People have to be able to cross the road where they need to without being mown down by a vehicle because they are perceived as being in the wrong. You can only cross at certain places, and they're not sufficient of those places. And then in terms of keeping abreast of developments in the field, well, road ethics, if you do a search for literature and scientific studies centered on road ethics, they're few and far between, but there's one particular legal philosopher from Rutgers University in the States who has tackled the issue of SUVs. We've got that problem here. Australia's got it. The UK has it. America has it in bucket loads. These cars that are getting bigger, heavier, faster. They protect their occupants magnificently in some cases, but they do enormous damage to crash partners such as children. They're known as incompatible crash partners. And Douglas Husak, the philosopher that I'm mentioning, he concluded that if I'm going to use South African reference points, if you're a Santon mommy who doesn't need a 4x4 vehicle, why have you purchased an SUV? Is it a vanity project? Is it egoistic because you want to protect your own and yourself? And he said, if that's the kind of reasoning why people are acquiring these giant vehicles, which also, by the way, do more environmental damage, then that is simply unethical. And then if you use your vehicle in frivolous ways, so I want to have a meal and I drive 50 kilometers to a restaurant that I fancy, that's frivolous. You know, can it be justified in terms of carbon footprint and exposing other people to the risk that your vehicle poses? And so I used his study to look at our minibus taxi industry, and I asked the question, is it frivolous driving? No, it's absolutely essential driving. Our economy would grind to a halt without the service of the minibus taxi industry. Are they incompatible crash partners? To some extent. An overloaded 16-seater minibus will inflict a lot of damage on another crash partner. But they're also very vulnerable vehicles. They're vulnerable to tipping over. The killer Quantums that you might have heard of, they are Toyota Quantum panel vans that have been illegally converted to minibuses. They're not fit for purpose. They've killed people, and our government is not yet dealing with them adequately. And then just a very familiar South African scene with the collapse of freight rail and this very, very slow recovery of freight rail. We've seen completely ethically unacceptable and life-threatening situations on some of our national roads. And I'm not just talking about life-threatening, say, to the odd light motor vehicle driver who has to mix in with the heavy motor vehicle traffic. I'm thinking also of the drivers of those trucks. They can be stuck in a truck for 2 or 3 days, no food, no toilets, no water, no medical assistance. We've got a completely untenable situation, which government has to very urgently rectify on safety grounds. So just in ending, I'd like to just encourage you guys, thoughtful journalism, thoughtful media of whatever sort can absolutely change the world. It can shift paradigms, it can improve people's risk insights, and can very definitely influence human behavior. And that in turn can ultimately save lives and reduce life-saving injuries on our roads. And I'd just like to finish with a term which I coined during my minibus taxi research, which is crashogenic. I think our road system is utterly crashogenic. It produces crashes as a logical output. So there's no point in being shocked and horrified by them. We have to simply accept our system is incredibly dangerous. We just, as a parallel, the term obesogenic, it talks about how the food systems and particularly the big food industry creates obesity in societies, shifts people's choices in an unhealthy direction. In the same way, our road system is crashogenic, and we need to deal with the system factors. And I'm very glad my fellow presenters have all given such great scientific evidence for why we've got to make our road system less crashogenic. So in ending, thanks for your attention, especially to members of the media, and all of the best with your very, very important work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Randall. That was very, very insightful. I think it brought a new dimension to perhaps us technocrats, and I'm starting to get a sense of socio-technical engineering becoming more real than just technical. Before I proceed, and I'm conscious of our time, I would like to give the media, we spoke a lot about media's role. Do you have any questions that I could ask before I attempt to moderate? And I don't think I have much time, but would you like to respond to some of the comments that Dr. Randall put on the table and any of the other remarks from our other colleagues from a media point of view? I'd like to give you an opportunity to pose a question or two, or even a comment. You're welcome to do so.
Sorry, my name is Luyanda Tan. My name is Luyanda Tan from the SABC. It's a such a powerful discussion, very informative. So on our side as a public broadcaster, I would love to just have a one-on-one interview. So it's where we will be asking questions for the stakeholders.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let me also thank you very much, and speakers. Thank you for your insightful presentations. I learned a lot today. So I do have a few questions that I want to ask. My first question is directed to you, Doctor. I'm curious to know who is missing in the conversations. Who would you like to see participating and is not participating?
I can immediately jump in with two possibilities. Our policymakers, I think, are very caught up at times in politics and other issues. And our public is very underinformed. Our public is very inured to risk. Your average South African accepts risk as a fact of life, and simply behaves accordingly. And when things like crashes and road deaths happen, there is often a fatalism of, oh, it was his time. So I think those two are not joining the party as much as the technocrats, the professionals, the practitioners. And without their participation, the sort of high-level participation, but also the grassroots awakening, for instance, awakening to safety de-spec vehicles being dumped in Africa. Same make, same model name, but what is sold to us might have 2 airbags, whereas the same kind of vehicle sold in Europe or Australia will have 6 airbags. We've got to get the public wider awake to what we are tolerating and why it's not acceptable.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
May I add 2 other factors? And it's a very interesting question, but traditionally they speak about the 3 E's when we talk about road safety, which is education, engineering, and enforcement. And asking that question, I think we talked about human behavior, and that is the main problem. There's 2 aspects affecting human behavior. One is education, one is law enforcement. So do we educate our kids from the early stages to understand what road safety is, what it is to behave in a safe way? Do we educate segments of the market, our taxi drivers, our heavy vehicle drivers? So do we give enough attention to education? And then I think law enforcement. Do we really support our law enforcement institutions? Do they do their work? I've had the opportunity to travel extensively in Australia, which is perceived to be very safe. But in Australia, I saw a big board saying the police is anywhere, everywhere. You will be caught somewhere, sometime, someone. Anywhere, anytime, anyone actually. But the point there in Australia is you don't, and then they've got the points demerit systems. You don't break the law because the law enforcement system is effective. So 2 factors, education and law enforcement. I'd like to mention that I think could receive more attention in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I like the fact that the discussion is focusing on human behavior. Right? And I'm curious to know, with regard to the stakeholders that the industry is talking to, what mechanisms are there to communicate to the people who are affected by this the most? In my view, this will be your low-income earners, people in informal settlements, people who build settlements next to the roads, So what mechanisms are there to communicate with these stakeholders? I'm sure anyone can take the question.
My view is slightly different in the sense that as I said before, build it and they will come. So if you're going to put a road, people want to have easy access to opportunities. So they will find a way, and the quickest way, the cheapest way, the most direct way to do that. And so our responsibility as built environment professionals is to make sure that people can navigate the environment and the environment is conducive, to meet their needs. I think there's been a lot of blame on pedestrians. It's their fault. They are the ones jaywalking. They are the ones crossing where they're not supposed to cross. But we have not taken sufficient responsibility for the way that we design our cities and whether they're conducive for people to be able to get around. So maybe Dr. Lee can go into how then you get to communicate better with the persons most affected. But I think there's a responsibility from the professional side as well to work better together from a land use planning perspective, integrated with transport and mobility.
Can I jump in? I think there's a crisis in civil society, a crisis of funding. Grassroots and other kinds of NGOs like ours have a very important role to play in awakening people to risks, but it takes funding. And government is not particularly engaging in empowering communities. And in terms of education, educating young children is the least proven road safety measure. Unfortunately, it's the least evidence-based measure. However, it does have its place, and road safety has made it back into our curriculum, thank goodness, after a very long hiatus. So there do need to be education mechanisms for children, but also lifelong learning is really important. As I mentioned, the traffic mix is changing, motorcycle drivers coming into the picture. There's lifelong learning for all of us required, new technology. But I want to also just go back to enforcement. And we as the Road Ethics Project, we are forever saying there isn't going to be a traffic cop every kilometer of every road, every hour of every day. We've got to awaken our inner traffic cops. We've got to grow up morally and ethically because external enforcement is only part of the picture. And I know in Australia, they even have cardboard cutouts of traffic cops, and there's some evidence that people slow down. It's a highly compliant, highly educated, high-income country. The dynamics are so radically different from ours. And we have a tainted history in terms of laws. We had unjust, immoral laws where the kind of morally, ethically correct thing to do was to defy those laws. There's some degree of confusion still left around the fact that laws should also be there to protect society and uphold people's rights. So we do have a deeply law-breaking culture in our society, unfortunately. And bribery and corruption also subverts the enforcement agencies. So it's a very difficult thing. And that's why in terms of human behavior, we try and inculcate that sense of internal moral growth and development, because we can't have traffic cops policing us effectively everywhere that we go.
I would like to add, because you were asking what platforms basically are available for community. I would like to say that I know that from the CSR side, which is a Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, our findings of our research, we communicate that via conference papers and journals that we publish, but more importantly, more on the ground, we do have media interactions quite a lot. I think about 2 months ago, I was also involved in the 4IR SABC discussions, where we are basically, along the research that we're doing, interact with media to show this is what we're finding and so on. Maybe the unfortunate thing in terms of how far that is reaching can be, if it's a scientific program, it's only gonna, a certain target market or audience would, find interest in it that might not necessarily, really cater for the greater demographic. But yeah, I know that particularly with the CSR, there's a lot of media interactions, and interviews and radio and so on that we try to make to put awareness out there from a scientific point of view. So yeah, I think that's what I can add in terms of the platforms that are available.
Funny enough, as you were providing this answer, I'm reminded that I did not even introduce myself. So I'm Saki Mabele. I'm the founder and editor of Transform SA Platforms. So we focus on topics relating to diversity, inclusion, inequality, Black empowerment. So this is very close to our hearts because it talks to the vulnerable groups, and these are the people that we talk to. But you mentioned earlier that CSIR has research that they're working on that relates to delivery motorcycles. Yes. Yeah, I'm curious about this because this is a growing market, and it seems like everybody has big plans that involve these motorcycles. So what does that research exactly focus on?
Okay, so we were trying to find what the demographic of our motorcycle riders are, what type of licenses they hold. And I think even more than that, to really try and understand the relationship between the contractual relationship that they stand with. Because I'll give an example with the 60-60. I understand we are in a generation or era where you want to click a button and then, food shows up, right? So I think in that drive, it's a great marketing movement. It's great for the business. It's great for the user, or rather the receiver, the consumer who's receiving. I mean, it's very efficient. It's very convenient. With a click of a button, then next thing they knock on your door. But we actually, with that, we don't realize that things operate in a system. So in pushing that effectiveness, that efficiency, there's this gap of influence on the drivers then, because the pressure is they need to get the food at a certain period, like amount of time. And if they don't, what incentives do they lose? And also, on the consumer side, obviously if there's a problem, then it's a whole, so the driver risk is not considered as far as that whole, system of, okay, we want to get food quick enough, to the consumers. Well, how is that done, safely, and what is it compromising? And again, on the other hand, I think what Dr. Lee Randall alluded to is, if I'm going to drive 50 kilometers to, go to a fancy restaurant somewhere, something I learned now, like, oh, wow, so now I need to not drive from Victoria to Sandton for a meal. I think it's an awareness to say it's frivolous, like you said. And if for me, what is so important about getting my groceries in 60 minutes? If I have, what options are there that I could, eliminate that are safer? What is so great that, okay, I understand that, if it's a sense of urgency, was there lack of planning from my side as a consumer? Did I not know that I'm going to run out of milk in the morning? So I'm just trying to bring it home to say these things operate in a system, and some things that benefit certain people or that have certain benefits, they actually open up a can of worms on the other side. So yeah, but that research is still, like I said, it's ongoing. We are still working on it. We don't have conclusive results to really, share, but in the preliminary stages, some of these things that, come up or were sort of insightful, I would say. Thanks. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, please. And then I'm going to.
Yes, yeah, no, definitely. So, Dr. You spoke earlier about SUVs, right? And how these are designed to protect the people inside the SUV. But it turns out like now that's changing a little bit because they're getting a lot of these Asian cars coming in. In fact, a lot of Asian SUVs. Now it looks like no one is really safe, both the motorists and the pedestrians. Now I'm curious, is this a big thing in the industry that you guys are discussing at the moment? Yeah.
Okay,
so just allude to your example.
Okay, I'll try to be short. I won't speak too much on, certain brands and all of that, but what I can speak to is the fact that as a CSR, we definitely believe in the legislation or regulation on the type of vehicles that are allowed into South Africa. And we don't actually have we don't have a limit to what we allow and what we don't allow, which in other countries, as Dr. Lee Randall showcased, that the same vehicle in other countries might have 6, airbags as compared to South Africa, where it's just 2. And then also further than that, whether or not what you're promised as a consumer that, your vehicle, for example, the ADS system, you'll only know that whether it works or not if you are in a case of a crash. If you don't get to a case of a crash, you won't really know if that system is active. So there's, we don't have in South Africa a system that really vets, if I should put it like that, the type of vehicles that we allow in the regulation. It's almost as if, we are just, welcoming anything. So yeah, I think that's as far as I can speak on that.
But do look at what Bobby Ramagwede, the AA CEO, puts out. He's writing very powerfully about this exact phenomenon of what gets accepted into Africa, not just South Africa, but Africa more broadly. We have more controls. We don't generally allow used vehicles in, but there are loopholes, and more people are exploiting those loopholes. But if you have a look at what he writes, this is a serious ethical issue, and it's a naive market. It's people who are not safety conscious in their choice of vehicles, and they're often very driven by affordability more than by safety. And what's very upsetting is the EU standards, which have been world leading, are somewhat being eroded with the EU-US trade relations issues, where the EU is showing willingness to kind of soften some of their own really global best practice safety standards for trade reasons, and that is very disturbing.
Yeah, we noticed that in the return to oil story. Thanks, colleague. I have to honor 2 questions from my team on the online, if you don't mind. Gordon, I can offer you 1 question, not both. On the first one is when you talked about the idea of has there been work done on increasing the availability and use or uptake of safe, very important to emphasize it, but public transport has on the number of incidents and deaths. An example may well be the increase in the pedestrian component of mortalities in Cape Town from 52 to 72, which matches the collapse of rail. On that one, I wouldn't know the answer on the research side of it, but what I can tell you is that the rail lines are opening up in Cape. For example, the Cape Town to Simonstown line is now open. So rail is improving, and in time to come, I think you'll see a change in that way we look at mobility in Cape Town. But what I can offer you is the question on which is the one that you say is quite challenging to some paradigms. And this is maybe for you, Dr. Randall, again. Is the minibus taxi industry not an unaware reinforcement of the motor normative paradigm?
So motor normativity is a term that's been coined, I think, by Ian Walker most predominantly, which is, it's also been called windshield bias. It's been called car centrism. And it's basically around people's dependency on motorized travel. Now, in South Africa, as Vishal actually said earlier, we've got a spatial problem. We've got a spatial legacy where people are having to travel very long distances, which makes non-motorized travel, at least on foot or by bicycle, really non-viable if they are to get to their jobs on time, for instance. So we are pretty beholden to motorized transport. And the question is very legitimate. Does the minibus taxi industry actually entrench that more, or does it kind of go against it? And when you think of the fact that 16 people, for instance, may be transported in one HiAce, they technically are active travelers or non-motorized travelers. Now, that is what we need. We need vehicles with multiple people in them for those journeys that are too long to consider doing on foot or by bicycle. So the minibus taxi industry can be seen as part of the solution, whereas those of us, particularly elites, who sit as a single occupant in the vehicle, we are really doing damage. So from that point of view, the minibus taxi industry is part of the solution. It's also more accessible. The problem with buses, for instance, is they don't serve all areas, whereas minibus taxis kind of get everywhere. They're very agile. A new settlement springs up, the taxis will be there. A new shopping mall opens, the taxis will be there. Whereas buses, for instance, trains, and rapid bus services are very much slower to respond to people's direct day-to-day needs.
Yeah, thanks for that. I have one last one. From Skulk. I need to honor Skulk because he's been waiting for a long time. Skulk, I'm not going to read your question out exactly as you have written it. But basically what Skulk is saying is that there's a phenomenon of policing of infrastructure. Like we saw the road train for moving of when you mentioned the moving of volumes of freight onto road away from rail, and the policing of that. Is there, and then he's asking the question around road design versus enforcement. If you know what I'm trying to say. Can we design the road maybe to be more durable, to allow for less enforcement because there'll be less damage? How do you find that balance as an option? Because enforcement seems to be a difficult phenomenon in any event. We're generally non-compliant in so many regards. We may not even be knowing what we are not complying with, but from a culture point of view, this is going to take a long time to shift. So he's talking about that. Maybe Sakadi, from the infrastructure report card, what were the proposals, if there are any on this?
None. And that's why in 2027, we're going to be looking at road safety as a segment of the infrastructure report card. But it was mainly focused on maintenance, on funding, on the condition of the network itself.
Asset condition.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Scout, I think you have to watch this space, is the answer. The answer is to your last statement is none. It is something that has to be worked on. So I apologize that we could not give you a meaningful answer to that one. Okay, colleagues, the moderation part I consider done. We are well out of time, and we have done well in terms of, I think, bringing to the fore the importance of road safety. I'd like to just say again, thank you, because my role is now about to end. I enjoyed the conversation that we've had, and I hope that you have found it meaningful. Colleagues on the call, those that have supported us, etc. And I'd like to allow Dr. Twala to do the closing remarks, the way forward. I wish you the very best in determining the way forward. I really look forward to listening to what that could be, because it could mean certain things for certain of us to do, to take into our domains separately, or like what you've mentioned is who's missing. It needs to be part of doing something. So, if I may allow you 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. I think the homework goes back to the people who brought us together today on what could be done. And I think today's session highlighted many points. And I would say the academies are well positioned to unpack some of them, maybe not all of them, because academies provide platforms for various sectors of society to come and examine, evidence around particular societal issues. So I think there's still a lot to do around examining the evidence, particularly because there was consensus around the presentations that we received today that a lot of what we see is around the human factor. So human behavior is amongst the key contributors around that. And there's context that we need to examine in unpacking that. And academies are established to examine multidisciplinary evidence. And if we're talking human behavior from a South African context, we can rely heavily on our social scientists who are on the ground understanding how South African society behaves. And one of the issues that, I'm battling with, or it will be my homework, is the issue of language. When Dr. Lee raised the issue of the term accident, I take it back to my language, whereby there's a possibility that in terms of languages, to interpret that, there could be issues in terms of the terms that we use. Because in my own language, which is not English, obviously, a dangerous occurrence can mean many things, not just purely an accident, something that could not be avoided, something that could not be, was not foreseen, as an example. So I think there is the role of social scientists, social practitioners, to say, how does somebody who is in the northern region of the country, in their own language, interpret what we call an accident or a crash, as an example, as the recommendation. And I think there is a nudge to that, because in some instances, it could be said when somebody died from a gun wound, as an example. You do not mention that because it is seen as being disrespectful. So you would say Ingos, as an example. So that's why I think once we've got engineering capability, and we need to do that, and I think from the presentations it was clear that we can do better from the onset to design our roads with the safety aspect up front, but it needs to go into the context. And I think the South African Academy of Engineering and ASAP need to go back home and sit around the table on how we really unpack this and what do we contribute into the bigger scheme of things in order to reduce the scourge of fatalities, crashes, because even if there's no fatality, there's negative consequence that just come, from a car crash, itself. So I think, and it's encouraging because we didn't start as academies on this today. We've had discussions before. I think now we just need to narrow down and look at where we can actually synthesize the evidence to contribute towards certain solutions. But as a last point, I would just like to thank the media. We really appreciate your presence in this session, but many other sessions that are hosted by the academies. We really would like to have your presence because you connect the message with the publics that we are trying to engage as well. So we really will encourage, we appreciate your presence today, but also encourage, further engagements with the academies in this regard. And also would like to thank our participants. I think they've managed, even those online, to hold on for quite a lengthy session. We really appreciate that. And then just lastly, the organizers of this event, Mr. Vishal, you steered everything very well. Today we are grateful to that. You had a team behind you. Asaf also, through Raj, who's been our lead in this, she's got a team behind that. And those people are really what got us together into this room. So from the academic's perspective, thanks everyone for participating. Thank you.
So with that, I'd like to close the forum. And Wish everyone well. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us online and for your perseverance. I know it is harder to do it online than in person. Thank you for your commitment. I'd like to now call it closed.